So when the hip joint goes into a flexed position, so hip flexion here, the glute, the femur, needs to be able to sit back so that we can almost pre-activate or sort of stretch the glute hamstring area. That allows you to push from here up out of the squat. That goes for a squat movement, and that goes for a deadlift type motion where we're lengthening the posterior chain of it. And what happens if those mechanics are off, if they're different, as you go down in that hip flexion position, if you're not sitting back, either the front of the hip is going to guard and protect that, so you'll feel tension in the psoas muscle or the TFL on the front of the hip, or as you go down, if you don't want to sit back into the hip, then you're going to overarch the low back, and that puts a compressive force to the spine. Now we can tolerate that for a long time, and people probably feel tension in their low back from that, but it's just not optimal because the loading pattern doesn't allow for the main stresses to go through the glute and be dispersed up through the pelvic ring through the SI joints. So if you, on the other side of that too, as you go into hip flexion, if you drop and round that way, some people will say, well, flexion of the low back isn't a bad thing. And that's true. That's true to some degree. I want people to flex to their low back, just not in a squat under load, and mainly I want them to have control and capacity of the movement. When you round into that butt wink, almost tucked under position, we lose the capacity of the glutes, and you can feel that. If you drop past that point, if you try that exercise, when you're down past 90 degrees and your back is rounded, so you're no longer sitting into the hips, that puts a lot more pressure through the low back area, and we have to move from there first to then get into a position to let the glutes come back into the equation. So the best way to do it is to sit the hips backward, drive pressure sort of into the back of the glute hamstring attachment, and then so as you load down, we create tension back through here, and that tension allows us to come back up and then tighten using the posterior chain. So that's where hip flexion, it's best if you can get the hip sitting backwards, and I would almost work from an all fours position, maybe supine, one leg, knee to chest, to start working on those mechanics to make sure that we're able to drive the hips back for those hip flexion type movements.